By the spring of 1945, the vast, terrifying military machine that Adolf Hitler had used to conquer the European continent was functionally dead. The hardened, professional veterans of the Wehrmacht, who had blitzkrieged across France and survived the freezing horrors of the Soviet Union, had been systematically ground into dust. But as the British and American armies crossed the Rhine River in the west, and the vengeful Soviet Red Army closed a ring of steel around Berlin in the east, the Nazi High Command refused to surrender. Instead, in an act of supreme cowardice and desperation, they issued the order to mobilize the Volkssturm, the People's Militia. They began conscripting old men in their 60s, and far more tragically, they weaponized the Hitlerjugend, the Hitler Youth. For the hundreds of thousands of Allied prisoners of war, American bomber crews shot out of the sky in 1943, and infantrymen captured during the freezing chaos of the Battle of the Bulge. This final, desperate phase of the war birthed a surreal and terrifying psychological nightmare. As the Soviet army advanced from the east, the Germans forced the Allied POWs on brutal, freezing death marches toward the interior of Germany. But the men guarding these columns of hardened, 25-year-old American combat veterans were no longer professional soldiers. They were literal children. The story of the 14-year-old guards, the agonizing tension of the American prisoners, and the explosive arrival of General George S. Patton's Third Army is one of the most poignant, bizarre, and heartbreaking chapters of the Second World War. To understand the terrifying dynamic of this situation, one must understand the psychology of a 14-year-old boy living in Germany in 1945. A boy born in 1931 had no memory of a world before Adolf Hitler. For his entire conscious life, his brain had been systematically rewired by the most sophisticated, all-encompassing propaganda machine in human history. His schoolbook math problems were about calculating the trajectory of artillery shells. His physical education consisted of throwing dummy hand grenades. He was taught that unquestioning obedience to the state was the highest virtue a human being could achieve, and that surrendering to the American gangsters or the Soviet barbarians was a fate far worse than death. When these boys were handed a Carabiner 98K bolt-action rifle, a weapon that was often taller than they were, and told to guard columns of captured Americans, they did not view it as a tragic exploitation of their youth. They viewed it as their ultimate glorious destiny. They wore oversized Wehrmacht greatcoats that dragged in the mud. They wore helmets that slipped down over their eyes. But beneath the comical, ill-fitting uniforms beat the hearts of brainwashed fanatics, and that fanaticism made them incredibly dangerous. For the American prisoners of war, being guarded by a middle schooler was not a relief. It was an absolute psychological nightmare. When an American GI was captured in 1944 and guarded by a 40-year-old German combat veteran, a grim but predictable professional understanding existed. The veteran German guard just wanted to survive the war and go back to his wife. If the American didn't try to escape, the German wouldn't shoot him. They operated under a mutual, unspoken set of rational rules. But a 14-year-old boy with a loaded rifle does not operate on rational rules. Americans who survived the infamous Black March across Germany recounted the absolute terror of dealing with the Hitler Youth Guards. These boys were deeply unpredictable. They were hopped up on 10 years of propaganda, constantly trying to prove their masculinity and desperate to act tough. If an exhausted, starving American B-17 waist gunner stumbled and fell in the snow, a veteran German guard might yell at him to get up. A 14-year-old Hitler Youth Guard, terrified of looking weak and eager to prove his loyalty to the Führer, was highly likely to simply pull the trigger and execute the American on the spot. The American prisoners were trapped in a horrifying paradox. They were massive, battle-hardened men who could easily overpower a 100-pound child in a fistfight, but doing so would invite immediate execution by the camp commanders. So, the Americans had to endure the profound humiliation and constant, nerve-wracking tension of taking orders, being screamed at, and being brutalized by children, whose voices hadn't even dropped yet. They walked for hundreds of miles on frost-bitten feet, starving on a diet of watery turnip soup, constantly watching the nervous, shaking fingers of the boys holding the Mauser rifles, just praying that the kid wouldn't accidentally or intentionally pull the trigger. But by April 1945, the agonizing reality of the POW camps was about to be violently interrupted. Deep inside the massive Stalag 7 camp near Moosburg, Germany, a severely overcrowded hellhole holding over 8,000 Allied prisoners, the atmosphere began to shift. The distant, continuous rumble of heavy artillery began to echo across the Bavarian hills. For the American prisoners, the sound was a beacon of salvation. For the 14-year-old guards standing in the watchtowers, it was the sound of their entire fabricated universe coming to a violent end. General George S. Patton's Third Army had violently ruptured the German lines. Patton was obsessed with liberating the POW camps, driving his armored divisions forward at a breakneck, merciless pace. He pushed his men 24 hours a day, knowing that every single hour he delayed meant the execution or starvation of more American prisoners. On the morning of April 29, the thunder finally arrived at Moosburg. Elements of the American 14th Armored Division, under the umbrella of Patton's command, descended upon the camp. This was the terrifying reality check the Hitler Youth had never been prepared for. The boys had been told by their propaganda officers that American tanks were weak, and that American soldiers were soft cowards who would flee at the first sign of German resistance. Instead, they watched in absolute, paralyzed horror as massive 30-ton M4 Sherman tanks crashed directly through the brick walls and barbed wire fences of the town. They saw highly mechanized, utterly ruthless American infantrymen pouring out of half-tracks, firing heavy .50 caliber machine guns that shredded the concrete bunkers to dust. The sheer, overwhelming industrial violence of the United States military evaporated 10 years of Nazi brainwashing in about 10 seconds. When the American tanks breached the perimeters of the camps and the roads, the reaction of the child guards split into two distinct, equally tragic realities. Some of the boys, too deeply indoctrinated to break, raised their rifles and fired at the heavy American armor. They were instantly and violently evaporated by return fire from the veteran American infantrymen, who simply did not have the time or the luxury to check the birth certificates of the people shooting at them. But the vast majority of the boys experienced a sudden, catastrophic psychological collapse. The moment the imposing American GIs kicked down the doors, the illusion of the thousand-year Reich shattered. The terrifying, fanatical prison guards instantly reverted to exactly what they were: terrified, crying children. They dropped their weapons. They ripped the swastika armbands off their oversized coats. They fell to their knees in the mud, sobbing uncontrollably, begging for their mothers, and raising their hands to surrender to the very men they had been brutalizing just 1 hour prior. Shortly after the liberation of the massive camps, General George S. Patton himself frequently arrived on the scene in his iconic open-top Jeep, wearing his polished helmet and his ivory-handled revolvers. Patton was a man who worshipped the ancient warrior ideals of combat. When he toured the captured ranks of the German guards and saw the faces of weeping 14-year-olds staring back at him, his reaction was one of visceral, unadulterated disgust. He did not pity them. He was entirely repulsed by the cowardice of the Nazi high command. He wrote in his diaries and told his staff that a nation that hid behind the bodies of its own children had completely forfeited its right to exist. For Patton, seeing an American combat veteran who had survived the horrors of the Ardennes being held captive by a brainwashed schoolboy was the ultimate insult to the dignity of the military profession. The liberation of the POW camps by Patton's Third Army provided some of the most haunting photographic evidence of the end of the Second World War. When you look at the archival photos of these moments, the physical contrast is staggering. On one side, you see the American liberators, tall, broad-shouldered, dirt-covered men smoking Lucky Strike cigarettes, leaning against the steel hulls of their Sherman tanks. They look tired, lethal, and undeniably victorious. On the other side, you see the captured child soldiers, skinny boys in filthy, baggy uniforms, their faces streaked with tears and dirt, hands clamped over their heads in pure terror. The story of the 14-year-old guards is not a story of military glory. It is a terrifying testament to the power of state-sponsored brainwashing. It proves that if a government controls the information a child consumes from birth, it can convince that child to commit atrocities, to brutalize grown men, and to throw their own lives away for a lost cause. The American POWs went home to rebuild their lives and their country. General Patton died shortly after the war, his legend cemented in history. But for the boys who survived the arrival of the American tanks, their punishment was having to wake up the next morning and realize that every single thing they had been taught to believe, everything they had been willing to kill and die for, was a monstrous, evil lie. They were a generation entirely stolen by a madman, saved from complete annihilation only by the sudden, overwhelming arrival of American steel.